Valerie. Oh, we're recording. Hi, I'm Valerie. Um, and I'm a developer.
And I'm Christopher, and I'm a designer. Valerie and I met while working on a distributed team in a high pressure, time sensitive context at a Fortune 500 client. And while there, we found a way to prioritize learning and experimentation despite these tight deadlines and constraints. And we want to share with you what we've learned about putting cross functional collaboration into practice. It starts with a brief story about dysfunction.
So, early in the project that we were working on, we got some feedback from some of the developers that they didn't understand why they were building our product. They didn't understand how their work related to the larger context of what mattered for users, and it became increasingly difficult for them to make appropriate trade offs on technical details when the only information available to them was a set of user stories. And so this conflict started to emerge between developers and product strategists. The developers were hungry for this bigger picture context, and the product strategists were really frustrated because they were spending a whole bunch of time like adding all these details to user stories to the point that they were beginning to look dangerously like specifications. And even then, it still didn't seem to satisfy the developers' needs. Meanwhile, our designers realized that they were just sitting on a bunch of context that could be valuable for the whole team.
Sorry about that. The captions are really slow and weird, so I'm kind of waiting for them to finish. Hi, everybody. So anyway, we had this situation that Valerie just described, right, where everyone individually had information that others needed, but that information wasn't flowing between us, leaving all of us extremely frustrated and unsatisfied. The metaphor I can think of, it's like an assembly line where you don't really know what is happening before you or what needs to be done after you. It can be difficult to know if and how your work moves the needle towards the desired user outcomes because of this lack of connection. It just makes it really difficult to foster empathy with your colleagues. When we find the team is in this kind of dysfunction, we look for blockers, and the blockers are usually the unmet needs of the individuals. And Valerie and I found the work of Paloma Medina on the science and neuropsychology of work and life to be useful here. Her biceps model helps understand what our coworkers need in order to feel supported and purposeful. So what does biceps stand for? B is for belonging, that people feel community and connection within their team. I is for improvement, that people can see in personal growth and progress toward a purpose. C is choice, that people have autonomy and flexibility to make decisions about things that matter to them. And then equity, meaning the access to information and resources feels fair and everyone is treated equally as equally important. P is for predictability. People can anticipate and prepare for future challenges. And S, significance, the work is visible to others and is recognized in ways that feel good.
So, tying the biceps model back to our story, the developers were expressing their need for improvement and understanding progress. The product strategists were expressing their need for choice and flexibility in how to express themselves and express the requirements. And everyone was missing equity in access to information, as well as belonging and mutual understanding of their teammates. The assembly line way of working was introducing a lot of these unmet needs. So we got together to figure out how could we explicitly address these needs. And one thing we ended up doing was we reimagined our bi-weekly showcases to include visualizations of how each individual unit of work was making progress towards new capabilities for our users, like the one pictured on this slide. And as a developer myself, I really appreciated seeing the dots connected so clearly. It's really easy to get lost in implementation details, so practices like this one were incredibly helpful for reminding me why I was doing what I was doing.
All right, so I'm dependent on the captions, and it's very weird because they're like 30 seconds behind. Anyway, and so what we just did, what Valerie just went over, this 100% changed the morale on the team. People were engaged, motivated, and found meaning in their work. And even those times of high stress, and there was a lot of stress, it wasn't a dramatic overhaul in our ways of working, but these new practices demonstrated how everyone could participate in design. It became the catalyst for a lot of the other small experiences that we ended up doing. And these collective experiences informed our philosophy about what it means to design as a team. And in the end, we wrote a guidebook to share some of these practices we use, and we'll share that guidebook with you later, or how to find it. And we hope you'll check it out. Some of you may be in different places in your journey to cross-functional collaboration, and we totally understand that. So today we'll teach you the building blocks that will allow you to bring your own creativity into the mix.
So, what does it mean to design as a team? One of the things we like to do is start from values. So, at the core of everything that we do, we must acknowledge that we're all humans and we all have those biceps needs. Empathy for users is very important, but it doesn't work if you don't also have empathy for your team members who are doing the work. So, when we talk about designing as a team, and solving real problems that teams are facing, we need to center all the humans involved. I can see the delay of the captions.
It's weird, isn't it? Anyway, it's like they're worried we're going to curse, which is not a bad worry. But anyway, this is why we like to use the language of designing as a team, because regardless of our individual roles, we remind ourselves that we have shared goals. And those shared goals are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve for our users. That's the reason why our jobs exist, or at least we hope that's why they exist. And we recognize that we bring different expertise towards fulfilling those goals.
Also, designing as a team is about systems thinking. What are some of the structures, barriers, and ecosystems that our team operates in and around, and looking for opportunities to get faster feedback from the system itself and also from each other.
Okay, from those values, we came up with a few principles that would drive desirable behaviors and practices on our teams. One, we focused on exchange. I believe I have something to offer, and I believe I have something to learn from others. To be clear, we're not here to take away design jobs. I have a design job. I love design jobs. When we say design as a team, we're trying to foster collaboration and shared purpose and amplifying everyone's expertise to break down hierarchy.
The second principle is being open to experimentation. So this is about imagining possibilities, trying new things, and recognizing that experiments don't have to be this big thing. It's simply about asking, what could we learn if designers and developers worked more closely together? Or what about developers and product strategists, or designers and quality analysts?
And then three, software is a socio-technical system, and so is the process of building it. Team practices are both technical and social. They're not just about maximizing our individual strengths and expertise, also about strengthening our relationships with each other. As such, cross-functional collaboration is useful for both the tactical and the strategic work.
And the last principle is approaches, not prescriptions. We're going to share a few examples of what designing as a team can look like, but we want to emphasize that they're just examples. There's no rule book, there's no silver bullet here, there's no you have to do these like best practices type of thinking here. It simply goes back to the idea of being open to experimentation and figuring out really what works for your team.
To understand how we put those principles into action, next we're going to look at pairing as our approach to cross-functional collaboration. We will give an example of pairing from outside technology, then explain what pairing looked like within our team and our work together, and finally offer a practice that can help your team identify who and how to pair. So let's first look at pairing as an approach. At a fundamental level, all pairing is two people who have two roles doing an activity together simultaneously. That's it. For example, from outside our work, a driver and a navigator are pairing in the act of traveling a car. The navigator maintains that high-level view of where and how you're going. They're going to get they're going to get there, while the driver is extremely focused on getting everyone to the destination safely.
It's important to consider what success looks like in collaboration before you start doing any work. In the example of driver-navigator pairing, success of the trip looks really different based on the reason for traveling in the first place. And it even changes the responsibilities of each participant and how they relate to each other.
So for instance, if you're going on a road trip, you're prioritizing fun and friendship. So efficiency is not necessarily your biggest concern. However, if you're pairing as a driver and a navigator in professional rallying, which is a form of auto racing, you're trying to drive as fast as possible around challenging roads without dying or getting seriously injured. On a road trip, so there's a lot of pressure there, right? And on a road trip, having a navigator is useful, but in rallying, they're so essential to sport, they're actually called co-drivers.
So let's take that analogy of the driver-navigator pattern and kind of bring it back to our world of technology and specifically developer-designer pairing. So if I'm occupying the role of the driver in the pair, it means that the core activity is probably something within my expertise. We might be coding on some HTML and CSS together. And perhaps the impetus for us pairing in the first place is I found an edge case that I'm not so sure how we should handle. So I invite Christopher over to pair with me. I share my screen, I explain the problem. And as a navigator, he asks me some more probing questions to try to gather more information, and he can provide some possible interaction patterns that could help solve the edge case. And then I take those ideas and I prototype them in real time to get his feedback to see if it looks right.
But after we're talking, maybe we realize the edge case is really thorny and we're not sure the proposed alternatives are feasible to implement. So we might swap roles. I take the driver's seat and Valerie occupies the navigator role. And when I'm in the driver's seat, I might start to sketch the journey up to the point where the edge case is, just to clarify our understanding of the problem and using Valerie's real-time feedback on technical feasibility or additional constraints. And I draw a flow that would address the situation.
So hopefully, as you can start to tell, the activities that we pair on are fluid. There are many ways for us to take advantage of each other's knowledge to solve problems. But to do that, we have to see each other as peers and partners in innovation. That's why empathy and trust are so important in pairing. And perhaps counterintuitively, we develop empathy and trust through working together. While we're each certainly capable of working alone, and many of us do spend time working alone, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's totally fine. There are going to be times when pairing will be useful, desirable, or even downright essential to achieving our goals, like in the case of the co-drivers. And what success looks like must be meaningful to the people who are pairing.
For the developer-led pairing that we did, success meant that I helped Valerie understand the context of use, and we implemented a worker user-driven solution for edge case. When we switched to designer-led pairing, success meant that Valerie helped me evaluate the impact and constraints of the edge case, and we converged on a new journey that would be technically feasible and desired by the user. In all of these examples we've given you, or in both of these examples, well, including the driver run, so 3, we both see both social and technical dynamics at play. These dynamics come in whenever people are pairing, and no matter the context or the goal.
In our example, Christopher and I were influencing each other by exchanging expertise in order to reach our goals. And we were building a relationship. Like, we had one before we started to work on that specific problem, of course, but the nature of our relationship changed as we worked together, not only through that problem, but through subsequent problems. And we maneuvered through our power differentials and other social and technical obstacles. And in our conversations with each other, we were simultaneously making tactical and strategic decisions by expressing needs and offering insight into progress. And meanwhile, we were growing our capabilities in our respective roles. This process made me a better developer, and it made Christopher a better designer. And importantly, we were getting better at working together. We were fostering empathy with each other, sharing stories, understanding underlying needs and motivations, and through all of this, learning to trust each other.
So pairing in product development is not just for designers and developers. Absolutely not. In our approach, design is a shared responsibility. That means creating a shared understanding of the user journey and working together side by side to harness the different skills and perspectives that everyone brings. What, for instance, could happen if quality analysts and designers paired, and we did that a lot? Or how about product managers and developers, designers and site reliability engineers, or developers and customer support staff?
Yeah, totally. The sky is truly the limit here. The result of all this cross functional collaboration, by the way, represents our hypothesis as to what is feasible, viable, and usable that demands further testing in production. Because without this, product managers are merely guessing at users' needs. Designers are handing over UI specifications without explanation, and developers are coding without understanding. And sadly, nobody is measuring if what we delivered actually brought any value to the user.
So up to now, we've talked about approaching collaboration through pairing and what pairing can look like. And reminder, pairing is 2 people working together on any activity. And then you might be sitting there asking which activities are worth pairing on and who should I pair with? To answer these questions, it can be helpful for your team to begin with a roles and responsibilities exercise, because the answer to those questions will come from within inside your team. The approach can be done, this approach, roles and responsibilities, can be done with a whole group in a workshop at the start of a project, or it can be done just between you and another person, or it can be done informally at your team's daily check-in, all of those things at once too.
So for a workshop approach, what you would want to do is have each person write down the strengths, skills, and expertise that they have to share. And do that even if those skills aren't strictly related to their functional roles. And then on a second set of stickies, you would want to have everyone write down the things that they need from others in order to do their jobs well. So one example that I might write could be, as a developer, I offer expertise in writing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. What I need is a representation of the desired experience and sample interaction patterns so that I know what to build. In a daily check-in or one-on-one sort of approach to this workshop, the exercise is more about the mindset of collaboration than about making this a formal, like contractual written down set of statements of what people offer and what they need. But no matter which approach you choose, once everyone's had the opportunity to share their ideas, what you do with this information is to look for patterns. You're hoping to get everybody's needs met through the various offers that are available. But even if that's not the case, this exercise will start to reveal some cool new opportunities for you to pair. So, what does an opportunity even look like, and how do you prioritize from these opportunities? So, by the way, some of these examples that we'll share might seem a little silly, but they're still real examples. It's just to kind of get the creative juices flowing.
So perhaps someone has an unmet need. We usually want to address these first because that means that someone on your team might not be able to do their job well or might find their work unsatisfying if that unmet need continues to go unmet. Maybe that need is going unmet because you don't have anyone with that expertise available, and so you might need to bring in someone from outside the team to pair on with that activity, because someone might say, for instance, I need help with my taxes, and we need to find someone elsewhere who has relevant expertise. Or someone who doesn't have that certain skill but wants to learn can offer to pair. It's really empowering to be as vulnerable to say, hey, I don't know how to do this, but if it's okay, I'd love to try and learn with you.
Absolutely. One of the most greatest ways to learn, for sure. And the second thing to keep in mind is just because something didn't make its way to a sticky note doesn't mean it's not an important thing to address. So going back to the biceps model that we talked about at the beginning, perhaps we want to introduce some team practices that would address those needs explicitly, or find ways to incorporate changes into the existing practices we already have, like Christopher and I did with our biweekly showcases. Maybe you have two people on your team who want to brainstorm ideas for improving community or allowing for more flexible ways of working with each other, as an example.
A really great and natural opportunity for pairing is when we find alignment between an offer and a need, right? I need this thing, you have this expertise, let's pair. Like the examples we gave about design dev pairing, where we were trying to work through an edge case together. Or another example, while on a road trip, the driver might need to have a bathroom break every hour. And the navigator can make this happen because they have the access to information on upcoming rest stops.
Yet another opportunity is when two people have similar offers. So pairing in this scenario can be an excellent way to share knowledge, reduce risk, aka the bus factor, and bounce ideas off each other. Developers do this sometimes by coding together, and we call it pair programming. And it's a great way for us to learn techniques from each other and solve complex problems. So why not designers pairing with each other? Why not people in positions of leadership? And again, these offers that I'm talking about don't necessarily have to be specific to people's day jobs. Maybe you have two musically inclined people who want to curate a team playlist together to help add joy to the day. Or maybe you have two foodies who really want to pick the lunch place. Pairing in this way is a lot about injecting creativity into the workplace based on what people are most passionate about.
We had such good food on that project because of this. Pairing made us eat well. Pairing isn't solely about meeting people's needs. By focusing on exchange, we don't mean to suggest this is purely a transactional interaction, right? Recall that within our principles, we see all of our approaches, like pairing, for example, as an explorative and social. Just because no one says they need the thing that someone is offering doesn't mean that thing that is being offered is not necessary or useful. Through exploration, we can come to understanding our team and our coworkers. Maybe someone on your team has a green thumb, for instance. That might seem irrelevant to the work you're doing, but by being curious, you can gain your insights from surprising places. There's potential for innovation in all of your team's untapped strength. So why not make the most of them?
Absolutely. If you've never tried pairing, we recommend trying out this roles and responsibilities exercise to figure out which of these scenarios might be a good place for you to start. It's something that you can do with very little preparation that can have a huge impact on the empathy and trust within your team.
However, you can also just ask someone to work with you, right? Nobody, we hope, is stopping you from making human connections at work. We encourage you to do this, just asking someone. Don't give it a big name, just start talking to people and break down barriers. Bearing is a fundamental skill for anyone who wants to build better relationships with your colleagues and experiment with different ways of working.
So thank you. We just want to wrap things up for you all and summarize what we explored today, what we have come to call the practice of designing as a team, which doesn't mean that a team is eliminating the design role, far from it, but that the team is actively participating in design and shares an understanding of how the product solution supports the goals and values of the user. And we remembered that the users are not the only humans at the center of this work. We all are.
And we've collected some of the ideas that we've talked about today, including other exercises and where to apply them. And there's a bunch of additional stuff, and it's all organized by where your team is on their journey. It's good stuff. And into the Design as a Team guidebook. We encourage you to download it and try some of those things out. And then please let us know how it goes, or if you have any questions or feedback, whatever, we're always happy to talk. And thank you.
Thank you. I'll keep this QR code up for a bit in case you want it for the guidebook.
I realized when I was clapping that I was muted. I was clapping. Sorry, here you go. There's the unmuted clap.
Thank you.
Great. So I think we're going to take some Q&A now, but Brian, would you like to say anything, or should I drive this portion, or how would you like to do it?
Yeah, you feel free to drive. I have to open the participant list. I'm gonna put all your names into a wheel of names, and then after the Q&A,
this is what pairing is right here. Spin. Who's the driver and who's the navigator?
Yeah, we're negotiating it right now. I guess I'll take the wheel while Brian navigates for a bit. Thank you so much, guys. That was fantastic. I had seen your deck on this topic previously, so I kind of knew what to expect, but it was still great to hear. Anyone who would like to ask questions on this topic, please feel free to drop it in the Zoom chat, and I will do my best. I know everyone can see it, but I will do my best to narrate it anyway. But I have a question for you to start, which I thought of while you were talking, actually maybe even as we were starting the entire conversation, which is our design team here at Yext is small. There are just a handful of us on what we call the kind of the core product design team. But we have a partner team in engineering that we call our UX engineering team. And they are responsible for, in terms of our internal platform-wide design system, we design and build out the UI components that we as the product design team use in Figma. But then they are tasked with building out the UI components that all of our product engineering teams across the platform will use. And we have always been pair in that we work together, and we've always had a positive relationship and a symbiotic relationship, but we are historically have been kind of siloed in that we are in different departments in the company and report to different kind of org structures. And we are trying out this new model where we are kind of bringing them into our day-to-day team dynamics. And as the product design team, we have a UX engineering representative now who sits with us in most of our day-to-day meetings and kind of product design planning meetings. And it's, I think we've taken this pairing, if there's an analogy for like what we've made it a marriage or something, and that we've kind of like blended the two worlds. But what are your best recommendations for with that kind of relationship where you're trying to take a pair and make them more than a partner and actually part of your unit? Like, is there a healthy cadence to do that? I mean, is it?
I mean,
I often wonder if he's like
before
bored.
Valerie jumps in, because I'm sure she'll have better examples. Like for me, a lot of this work was born out of like necessity, right? Because I'm on very heavily engineered teams, right? And like, it's not very effective for me to just sit over in my own little world. And as somebody who's been in design for a long time, there was always this debate about whether designers should code. And I realized that was the wrong question. It's really, how can designers work better with the people who are coding? That's their day job, And so, and I think the other part of it is something you said about kind of breaking down traditional barriers, right? And learning how to be friends with people because they have all this information, right? And so, and it's, especially when I'm, trying to design a bunch of stuff for lots of developers to put in practice, it really slows me down if I spend a week doing something that they're like, actually, we can't build that, So
Sure.
Take it from that approach. I don't know, Valerie, do you have any other thoughts about that? Just sort of like background information?
Yeah, one of my thoughts is like, I think for me, like an ideal world is one where like we all sit on the same team. Like in your example, there would be a design system team, and you have people with all sorts of different skills working towards that goal of building a design system and figuring out who you're serving with that design system. But I know a lot of organizations are like in places where that's not how they're organized. And getting to that place is a big challenge. You can't just wave a wand and be like, reorganize. We're different now. And so I think the approach that you described, Travis, of like having an engineering representative in your day-to-day work as designers, I think that's a really good step. Like, it's helps build that community, helps build that trust. You don't have to prove anything to anybody yet. Like, you don't have to go convince a bunch of leaders in your organization to let you do that. You can just do it. Like, you can just start talking to engineers and be surprised by what comes from that.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's really up to one team to break through the silo, right? Like, somebody's going to have to do it. And when designers and developers are meeting, sometimes it's like meeting a wild animal. You need to stick out your hand and have them smell it. And who's the wild animal? I will let it be on somebody else to determine. But like, well, one of the things we did in our team is we just started sharing all of our information, right? We started doing these weekly design stand-ups that were basically like, here's what we learned about our users this week. Here's what we learned about our journey. And then developers could ask questions. And like, as many places as we could create for those kind of interactions, when we did user interviews, we were like, okay, we need to have an engineering representative. Who's that going to be this week? And so all those kinds of things that we were transparent. And there's, one of my big fears is that people think design is magic. It's not magic. It takes a lot of work, right? And so more people can see the work that goes into it, the less they tend to think, well, just go off and design that,
Sure. I think design is kind of magic. It's the intersection of science and magic, We do have a question from someone in the Zoom chat now. What do you do when one member of the pair assumes a power over the power with affecting the parent? Assumes a power over the other, I assume, affecting the parent. When one member of the pair assumes power over the other, affecting the parent, what do you do in that situation?
I'm going to ask Valerie to take that over. That's a tough question.
It is a really tough question. Thank you for asking it. Because I think it is really important to be aware that can happen. And I think that's part of the big step. Like, people don't realize a lot of the time that why pairing might be difficult is because, like, for example, you have a more senior person pairing with a more junior person. That more junior person maybe afraid to be vulnerable. They don't want to look stupid. They want to prove that they know how to do their job to the senior person. And at the same time, it's important for the more senior person to recognize that power imbalance and kind of accommodate for that and make that session a safe space for them to make mistakes together. Like I think that's the other part of it. Like you're doing this to work together. You're not watching somebody else do their work and like commenting on it. You're doing it collaboratively as a unit. Kind of going back to what we said earlier, you have to see each other as peers in some sense in the task that you're doing in order for it to be effective. If that's not happening, which certainly can be the case, obviously that may require some, escalation. Probably would need to, figure out the specifics of that scenario. But I think if you're self-aware that, what power you bring to the equation, whether it's seniority or age or race or gender and so forth, like recognize the power you bring to the table and figure out what you're going to do to mitigate that so that you can have a successful collaborative working relationship. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer, Valerie. And I think that, we have given you the Pollyannish view maybe of this, but we did have some really difficult stakeholders, right? And we talked about those as a group, and we talked strategically about how to involve them, right? Because there are people who didn't like our way of working and found it too transparent and weren't used to the typical hierarchies being understood, and also just didn't like being asked questions, and so, and being able to escalate that to some of our team leaders to say, hey, how do we deal with this person? And can you have that conversation with them? So sometimes those kinds of things would go to them and they would say, hey, my team really needs your help on this, and explain what the theory was behind it. And, in that sense, really grateful for leadership in that way. But being able to talk about that openly within the team really helped us work with stakeholders outside the team and pair with them.
That's great. We have 2 new questions. I think I'm going to ask them in reverse order because the second one is directly related to what you just said. What do you do if you want to reach out to start implementing a pairing relationship, but the other side is resistant or reluctant?
I can start. This happens quite a bit to us actually in our work as consultants, and especially from a developer side. Like I encounter many other developers, not even talking about cross-functional pairing at this point, but even other developers who are resistant to the idea of pairing, and that can be for a lot of reasons. Maybe they had a bad experience with pairing before, where maybe somebody was like watching everything they were doing and telling them everything they did wrong. That's not pairing. I want to be clear, that's not pairing. And so what I do in those types of situations is first I try to understand, like, okay, like what was your experience? Have you paired before? Why are you reluctant? Like, tell me a little bit more about this. And the other half is that I'm not going to force someone to pair. If they don't want to pair with me, that's fine. I can, I be diplomatic about, here's what I think pairing will get us. It's going to help us go faster together. It's not just about me extracting something from you or you extracting something from me. We're partners, and this is a way that I demonstrate partnership with someone. And that usually works. And also, I also try to just give them a little like teaser session in a way like, hey, let's try it for like 30 minutes, an hour on this specific activity. And if you don't like it, like we can stop. So that can be another way to just like keep it really low key. Like don't force people if they're really uncomfortable, obviously. And try to hear where they're coming from and address their concerns. Anything you want to add to that, Christopher?
I think also what was helpful for us, and Valerie just talked about this a little bit, is that we demonstrated the behaviors we wanted in pairing at the team level, right? So we talked about our principles and we talked about the biceps model. And one thing we didn't talk about is Thoughtworks does team health checks, I think every quarter, right? And we use that information to understand where people were, and we use that information to talk to the team cross-functionally, right? And we always took that approach around cross-functional discussions, and cross-functional was just built in the way we worked, right? So that then when those kinds of behaviors and principles filtered down to the pair, right, we'd already demonstrated what they look like at the group level. And I think that's part of it too. Like, don't expect people to do things at the pairing level that are so out of sync with how the whole team operates, right? So I think that's another important thing. So maybe before you reach across the boundary, you make sure that you are working your values at the team level and within your own group.
To this topic of reluctance, extending this metaphor way beyond professional pairing, my romantic partner and I, she is the very open-minded Zen of the two of us, and I am the grump. And somehow she's able to reach across the aisle and make that work. So, you know, it can be done, right? We have two more questions here, and second one again is kind of more tied to this, but I don't want to miss out on the older one. So the older one is, how do you recommend improving management of tight deadlines with the team's expectations on a large project, especially if the roles have been siloed? And I assume the extension of that question is maybe how do you break down the silos to accomplish that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the ideas that went into this talk and our guidebook that Christopher and I put together was born from a situation of very tight deadlines. It was from necessity. Like, it was from recognizing that the pressure was so intense. We needed a way to deal with that strategically, or else we would sink. And recognizing that, like, prioritizing learning and experimentation in that context, like, counterintuitively, like, actually helped us go faster. I don't know what else you want to add to that, Christopher.
No, I mean, we're answering the one about power dynamics, right? I'm a little confused about which question we're answering, but it doesn't matter. It's probably the same answer no matter what, right? That, like, I think when we talked about with design and dev pairing, right? Like, we are coming to that. It really kind of depends. Like, sometimes I was coming to Valerie, and obviously I was going to her for expertise, and she would come to me for expertise. And I think that sort of sets the tone, right? It's like, who is the person asking the question, really? And, like, what are you expecting from the other person? And you can daylight that at the beginning. Hey, I need this from you, right? Or we would do that in our daily check-ins. Like, if we were facing a blocker and we're like, I'm working on this thing and I know I'm behind this thing, but I really need someone to help me understand, like, feasibility of data tables or whatever it was, and so can I get a volunteer for that? And then they would sort of, like, discuss that around amongst the developers themselves, who was the person that had a little bit of time to work with me for an hour, right? And so that becomes part of the question.
I think the last thing I'll add to that is that as leaders of this team, Christopher and I felt responsible for setting an example through our behavior. So we demonstrated this is what it can look like for engineering and design to work together, and provided a model for the rest of the team. Like, this is where I can ask questions. This is how we share information with each other. I can just talk to this person and ask for their feedback or their advice. And kind of made it okay for other people to do that as well. So I think there was a lot of power in us kind of recognizing, like, the power of example.
There's a couple of questions about change management, and I'm thinking about, if we go back to our biceps model, right? That biceps model works for everyone. So you can say, why is this person resistant to change? Where are their needs not being met in that bicep model? And then start to try to, like, talk through them. Like, how can I help you feel included or feel whatever the piece of biceps model that we think they're not meeting, right? And then we try to meet that, and we can do that before we pair. Sometimes you need to have those questions separately from the activity, right? And we do this all the time as consultants, right? try to get into people's headspace and understand why they're resistant. It asks really direct questions, and that might need to be happen. Like, if pause the parent and say, hey, can we talk for a moment and say, I'm feeling this or I'm seeing this. Can you help me understand what you're thinking right now? And just really be honest and open about it. That's just change management aspect of it. And all of our jobs kind of end up going in that way direct eventually once we start dealing with humans and the way we think and the way we resist change.
It's funny, a lot of these questions have that similar theme of resistance to change or resistance to each other. Must be a common theme in people's workplaces. Hope not, but it must be. We have a new one here. Is there a way to put a number on how valuable it is for engineers to know the purpose of a project? It would seem to make engineers happier, but is there a way to make that persuasive? That's a good question.
So maybe Valerie can answer this question. I was thinking like, I hate story points and all those things, and Valerie probably has some ideas about that, but those are ways to see like whether people are satisfied with their job. We also, as I said, we have these team health checks, right? And like those health checks that we do, we'll ask questions about, do you feel your opinions are listened to? Do you feel supported, right? And those are ways to understand whether introducing our practices was improving team morale. And also, if you wanted to get really Fordist about this, about how we're pushing through more work.
Yeah,
we had a very unhappy team at one point.
Yeah,
everyone does at some point.
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry too much.
Yeah, I think also it's really difficult to quantify something like this. I know we want to, right? Because either somebody is asking for justification, like, why are you doing this activity? I think it's a waste of time. And so we're trying to put some kind of numbers or dollars behind that. So I understand where that comes from. And I think sometimes it may not be a satisfying answer, but sometimes we have to resist that a little bit, because putting a number on something is almost a little too neat, right? Can I really say like, oh, I am 2% happier because of this one practice that we introduced like every week? You can't really say something like that. But I think getting that kind of qualitative feedback through something like what Christopher mentioned, the health checks, can be one way to kind of feel how people are feeling. And the other thing is thinking about why does your organization exist? Like, we should all be really in tune with that, right? And if we're not, then something's wrong, right? Like, we have our jobs for a reason. There's some mission that our company is trying to achieve. If we don't understand what that mission is, what are we doing?
I like that. There's this one's not a question, it's just a statement, but it's a nice positive one, so I think it's worth calling out. He says, I've coached up devs before to help with design work and co-creation. It's a nice feeling of design empowerment and education through teaching others how to fish. I like that. For teaching each other how to fish. I like it.
I always love working with designers because it opens my eyes to a world that I don't get to see every day. Like, I don't always get to, actually very rarely do I get to participate in user research. I think that's sad, because when I do, I learn so much about the thing that I'm doing. I learn so much about our users, and it just blows my mind every time. And I know that the feeling is mutual, because when I've worked with designers who have maybe never worked with a developer before, they're like, oh my God, I've learned so much from you. Like, this is so exciting. Can you tell me more? I want to know more about HTML. Like, let's code together. Like, I had a product manager code with me and was so excited that he got his name on a commit. Like, it's all joyful, and it's just really great to have those moments.
Sure.
And I mean, as a designer, we have a history of sending things to developers and then having to make changes in the implementation, which is totally understandable, except they prioritize the wrong thing. And I'm like, well, if we had talked about this earlier, we understood like what was important to our users or context, we could have avoided this whole back and forth while you maybe made a choice on data in throughput instead of like presentation or whatever the prioritization change you made, but those are things that can be avoided if the developer understands more about the user context.
Sure. Looks like we have a participant with a hand raised. Sonia, did you want to ask a live question? I don't see any reason why not.
I do. And thank you for recognizing my hand raise.
Sure. I'm sorry I missed you.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm Sonia, and I'm currently on a contract. I'm working as an accessibility designer, and I have a team, about 40 people that I work with on a daily basis. Some are accessibility engineers, some are accessibility designers. Some of us have lived experience. And one of the reasons why I use the raise hand feature is because I have dyslexia. And so I can't always participate in the chat. There's another conversation going on, and while we may not think like with 20, 30 people, it's like a big thing, but it still is. And so I'm wondering if pairing might be another way to build empathy and understanding of accessibility limitations and what people are going through in the day-to-day work. And also just to show some of the things that we are able to work on and allow to have happen when we do things like look for hand raised or have these conversations about inclusive design and comparable experiences. So I just wanted to bring that up to the speakers and see what their thoughts are on that. Thanks.
Thank you for your question, Sonia. I loved your question because Christopher and I are both very passionate about accessibility, and we have a perfect personal story. So I don't know, Christopher, if you want to share your experience.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I want to work for your team. And yeah, I mean, I might have the issue with the captions is because I'm deaf. So I was really having this panic about the fact that I was like 10 seconds behind in this whole conversation. And, I think there's two things that are really good about pairing and accessibility. One is this, you should build accessible products with people who have the needs of the accessibility, right? And like not just test it with people with disabilities, but the whole thing with people with disabilities. And so that's important. You build that empathy with users. We're trying to do that within Thoughtworks too. We just did a whole internal series where people within the company talked about their disabilities as part of a training program in Italy. The other thing about pairing is me as a person that is ADHD, like pairing is a really good way to help me focus, right? And so pairing helps take all the scattered thoughts that are in my head and help bring them back to the solution, right? And having another person there as a guidepost is really, really helpful. So I think there's really strong personal needs for pairing as well. And I think this is in our guidebook, right? We did the communications thing. Maybe
Yes,
we did.
we
We talked about it. Yeah. So our team had a communications charter, and this also deals with power differentials, right? We all talked about what our communications barriers were. And obviously, for me, the point was to talk about hearing, but everyone else talked about other barriers to communication. Maybe it was language, maybe it was emotional sensitivity, maybe it was cognitive issues, whatever they were. And so then we talked about all of these different issues, and then we talked about different solutions, right? And then we kind of put them together in a charter. This is how we were going to handle communications and as a team. So those kinds of things that we've built into our practice, we think very much about all the way through designing as a team. And so, yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of opportunity, I think, for pairing and accessibility, maybe even more so than the rest of the world, but accessibility and pairing are there's a lot of strong reasons there.
Sonia, I want to personally apologize for not acknowledging your hand raised. I am frequently negligent about it, and I am embarrassed and willing to admit it. And I'm also not used to narrating a Zoom chat or narrating a Zoom from the chat question. So I have two things working against me. I'm so sorry. My boss frequently also, outside of any type of accessibility issue, be it deafness, dyslexia, it's also just a good way to have the quieter voices in the room have access to the conversation. and it's something we are trying to champion on my team, and something I'm often guilty of. So I'm really glad you asked a great question. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Travis.
Sure. Okay, another question on the topic about asking a developer to teach a designer how to code. How would you ask the developer to spend time out of their day to teach coding while they're already tied up with their work throughout the day?
I'm not so sure that it's necessarily about teaching a designer coding. Like I don't think I taught Christopher how to code. It's more that I am coding, and the coding is a collaborative practice where I'm the one with my hands on the keyboards doing the coding, and Christopher is an observer, seeing what's happening on the screen and providing feedback and kind of redirecting. Oh no, like actually, can we try this instead? And then I will interpret his feedback into code. So that's
Yeah.
I hope that answers the
Yeah,
question.
I sometimes talk quickly, and as plenty of ex-partners will tell you, I tend to start in the middle of an idea. So I didn't mean to suggest that developers need to teach designers how to code. Is that designers just don't need to know how to code because they can always pair with a developer, right? And that is going to be beneficial to both of us because they have that expertise and I have my expertise. We bring that together around the front end design, right? And so that the UI, that's where it comes together. And it's not, neither of us can do that together. The UI is this place where the designer and the developer have collaborated and put that out into the world. And so I think it saves time for both of us. And I mean, I learn things about code and the restraints of code all the time while talking to developers, but I don't need to actually know how to do it. But the next time I go and design, I've already got some of those embedded constraints. Oh, I remember him telling me this, so I need to think about that ahead of time, you know. I think that's helpful without having to know all the nuts and bolts of it. There's one other thought I had there, but I can't remember. Anyway, that's the gist of it.
Excellent.
Oh, I guess the one thing I have worked with developers on when I was trying to learn a little bit about Storybook, because that's often a place where designers and developers will come together, where designers are working on, you know, the styling issues and the developers are working on the component itself. That's not always the way we work, but it's a possible way to work. And so I actually had developers tell me a little bit with Storybook and getting that installed and stuff, because it's very much a platform built for developers.
How are we doing here on time, Brian? And have I bought you the time you need for all of your navigation tasks? My hands are getting tired on the wheel here.
Yeah, I think we're good. I don't see any more questions in the chat. I think we are safe to wrap up. I'm gonna stop the recording here. If I can find the recording button, there it is.